We're meant to have connections, and in order to have good, meaningful connections, we have to be vulnerable, which means that we have to be able to talk about things. If you had a broken arm and a cast on it, no one would feel any shame or stigma around that, where you have to be all things for all people, and then you're spread too thin, you have to serve all of the problems, and all of that leads to so much burnout. If you don't stop, your body will make you, because our body really holds all of this stress. The word vulnerable, that literally means that you have a chance of being hurt. And it's always going to be scary, and it's always going to feel like a risk. And it is the only way to move forward in life and in relationships. Loneliness and isolation is going to make everything worse. When we're in a stress response, we lose access to this front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and rational thinking. So we're not at our best when we're stressed.
How does one build that kind of resume? I know the outcome now. What was the journey to get there?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I actually went to college to be an athletic trainer. So I was an athlete all my life, and I was told, hey, you'd be good at this. And I want to be the person who ran out on the field and popped the shoulder back in place and did all of that, which is still helping people. But I started volunteering at this crisis resource center when I was in college. To this day, I don't remember why or how I got involved, but I did. And I found myself loving helping these people who would come to this place. And I was a quote unquote lay counselor. So they knew I wasn't trained or anything, but I was just there for support. And I had actually started in therapy myself for the first time in college. And I loved my therapist. She was immensely helpful to me. I've always loved the brain. I love psychology and why people do what they do. And so I really started rethinking everything and made the shift right at my junior year. So became a therapist, did all the things you got to do to get licensed. And then I had heard about this type of trauma therapy called EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, super long name. But the research on it, I'm a big research geek. I need to see the science and the research behind things. And it was so incredible. The amount of sessions was very limited. You didn't need to be in therapy for, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years. You needed like maybe 5 to 15 sessions of this. And it's a completely different process, because when you're dealing with trauma, it's a completely different part of the brain than what talk therapy does. So I got really intrigued. I got trained in that, went on to help train other therapists in getting certified in that. And in the midst of all of this in 2020, especially as things were all online from the pandemic, I happened just to be getting more clients that were business owners or entrepreneurs or executives. And imagine this, that the more you got mentally and emotionally, the more your business grows. So I was...
That's crazy.
Right?
Is that legal? Can you just do that?
One of the things I always love to say is that you can't check your baggage at the door just because you go to work. It's going to be there. And so as that resolves and you become a healthier, better you that's living at your potential, then of course you're going to think clear, see clear, grow more. And so then I started doing more executive psychology coaching and been doing that for the last 4 years, which I love. In the 2020 year, I had an opportunity to write a chapter in a book that's an international bestseller. Some of that's on my personal story, and each chapter was by a different author. And the idea is for people to have this to read while at home during the pandemic. And there's tips and tools at the end of each chapter. And one day on a run, I was when I do a lot of my thinking, and when I get really creative and get inspired, I had this like notebook full of ideas I would do nothing with, but they were there. And I had these ideas, and I had an idea for the app that my brother and I are now creating called Sofree. And so I take some of my background in EMDR, and we combined it with technology. And we've come up with this awesome app that I'm sure I'll share more about, but can reset your nervous system in under 2 minutes. using something called bilateral stimulation, or it's a stress detection app. So it'll literally catch your stress before you can. And then we help calm you down immediately. So you're not having to wait hours or days to feel relief. You get it in the moment.
Wow. Yeah, the 2 minutes is a very, very good tagline, right? Okay, I can maybe invest 2 minutes in my own well-being. I'm going to splurge today. That's obviously super impressive, and I'm having trouble figuring out where to start. But maybe let's start at the end. You mentioned the execs coaching, and one of the things that I observed over the time is that nobody seems to be ambivalent to therapy. They either love it or hate it. If you go on it, it's either complete waste of time, it's not for me, or it's the best thing that ever happened to them. Why do you think it's so polarizing?
I think it's polarizing for a few reasons. One, I think the person's actual willingness to change. So if someone's going because their spouse made them, or because their boss said that they needed to, and they don't really want to be in it, then your mind's just going to scan for all the negative in it, and it's not going to be invested or open to change. And on the other hand, when someone is willing to change and put in effort, then they're going to reap the results of that. And a lot of times people don't even realize that they're living with so much burden and stress, and sometimes you do. But either way, having someone who can help you see your blind spots, or if there's something that is specifically going on, like you're having anxiety or depression or intrusive thoughts or whatever from some overwhelming life experiences, then therapy can be immensely helpful. I don't know of a single person who hasn't been through some sort of overwhelming life experience. I like to use that word instead of trauma, because trauma has become a overused buzzword, but everyone's been through an overwhelming life experience, and that doesn't always negatively impact us, but it can. And being able to resolve those symptoms so you can be who you truly are feels great. And so I think it's always going to go back to the individual, and not just the individual, but do you have a connection with your therapist? Certain personalities just clash, right? And I encourage people, if you try one out and don't like it, don't just attribute one bad experiences to all therapists. That's like saying being in a relationship where your partner cheated on you, therefore all women are cheaters or all men are cheaters. You can't attribute one bad thing to everyone.
It's an interesting example, because I think a lot of people actually do exactly what you said.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and that's part of how your brain is trying to protect you from being hurt again.
Yeah, exactly.
However, you could be missing out on, in that example, really great people, or finding a therapist that's for you that can really help you.
Okay, so then my second observation is that the word therapy itself is a little, I don't know, stigmatized. A little, if you called yourself a coach, it's perfectly acceptable for someone whose job is a leader. You mentioned the execs. I'm imagining CTOs, CEOs, all kinds of O's and E's and C's. And then they say they go to therapy, and that's almost like admitting that they need serious help. How do you get over that? Is that a branding problem? Is that just people are so judgmental?
I think it's a society and culture problem. You said the reason why it's the problem just there is that there's this belief that if I go to therapy, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I'm of the belief that there's nothing wrong with any of us. There's stuff that's happened to us. And we actually have to get back to who we are and figure out how to sort through all of that. One of the biggest self-sabotaging behaviors in leadership is the inability to ask for help. Nobody can get anywhere without anyone else. So in order to break that stigma, it needs to become normalized, and I think even more than normalized, be seen as a sign of strength, because healthy people ask for help and strong people ask for help.
And you said you had an influx of leaders from the business background coming in. Obviously, that's a sign of you being an awesome practitioner. But also, do you think it's a sign of people like acknowledging that and this actually becoming more normalized, or not necessarily?
I do. I definitely think it is much more normal than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago. I think about my parents' generation. You did not talk about your feelings. You did not talk about, you keep the family secrets to the family and you push it under the rug. And then that's how we were taught to operate. But we're seeing the long-term damaging effects of operating that way. And we're meant to have connections. And in order to have good, meaningful connections, we have to be vulnerable, which means that we have to be able to talk about things. And people are afraid of what they can't see because a lot of mental and emotional issues are so internal. People often make it a reflection of someone else, or what's wrong with them, or a reflection of yourself, or what's wrong with me. When in reality, if you had a broken arm and a cast on it, no one would feel any shame or stigma around that. You could see it. So I think there's the fact that we can't see things visibly that hinders people's ability to see the fact that this is a strength and not a weakness.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of mental gymnastics here because I want to both acknowledge at the same time, mind you, that obviously this is all very personalized, right? Everybody's unique and they've got their experience. But I'm also curious if there are trends. You mentioned the inability to ask for help. What are other things that you're seeing over and over in this particular business people group that you think is not talked about enough?
For executives and leaders, entrepreneurs, I think vulnerability in general just doesn't happen. And so things just aren't being talked about that need to be. And if that could shift, so many problems would be resolved. Procrastination, for example, another common self-sabotaging behavior, but that's going to go back to avoiding something that's making you anxious because you're believing something negative about yourself. What if I fail? Or this is too much for me, or I can't handle it, or something like that. If some of the stuff was just verbalized and worked through, even in a team setting, then it would resolve a lot of issues on its own. But to go back to your question, the things that I'm seeing is more and more burnout. And
burnout.
Yeah. So then you have to ask, why is there burnout? So what's the drain? What's zapping people of their energy, and especially in this type of population? And there's a couple of things that I believe are major contributors to burnout. One of them being loneliness, another being the inability to ask for help. And then I think for especially entrepreneurs, but also executives, there can be this like white knight mentality where you have to be all things for all people, and then you're spread too thin. You have to serve all of the problems, and all of that leads to so much burnout. Good leaders really rely on their team and really don't try to do all the things and can delegate and ask for help and don't have to know everything. I think there's an expectation that leaders put on themselves that because I'm in this position, I should have it all together and I should know it all. And neither of those two things are possible. But that gets internalized. And then what happens is you isolate yourself emotionally, isolate yourself from connection because now shame is there. And all of these things create this emotional drain. And our emotions, the limbic system, is directly connected to our immune system and our nervous system, which goes from the top of our head to the tips of our toes. So these different apparatuses are all connected to each other. So this is part of why understanding your emotions, normalizing it, expressing it, understanding other people's emotions, being able to use, manage, and perceive the emotions in yourself and other people is so important, is because when you start to shut that down or suppress your own emotional states, then you're also going to get sick physically because it's all connected. What our Western society has done us a disservice by separating the mind and the body, the healthcare system from the mental healthcare system. They should never have been separated to begin with. And so that book by Dr. Kessler, if if you don't stop, your body will make you, because our body really holds all of this stress. And so you think about burnout, there's like all these things that can contribute to it. And most of them are going to be underlying emotional needs not being met.
Oh, wow. So I include myself in the group of people who used to think that burnout was about overworking. And I think now I'm beginning to understand, at least in the last few years, that these are two very distinct things, right? You can be burnt out without actually working that hard, and you can also be working very hard and not be burnt out. And I think there's like a delay in how this is seen. There's obviously this hustle culture about you've got like figures like, I don't know, Elon Musk going and talking about how he's sleeping on the floor of his factory, and that's glorified. I think I'm very skeptical, and I'm sure you have your opinions as well on how well that would go if that was actually the case, at least for any prolonged period of time. But the message itself is glorifying this, if you're not working 80 hours or 100 hours a week, you're just weak and you need to fix yourself. Do you think this contributes to this weird way of seeing burnout that we still have? Do you see that kind of picture in your clients? Or do they, by the time they come to you, get enlightened a little bit and make a distinction?
That's a great example that you're giving, because yes, we are in a be overproductive, overwork society, and the busyness addiction is a real thing, and work addiction is a real thing. And so you think about, we're talking about behaviors that provide some sort of instant gratification. And it could be for good reasons, because I'm helping people, or there's this new app that I'm doing, or there's this, whatever it is, that there's no negative intentions to it. It could be for very good things. However, despite doing it, or even though that you're engaging in this overworking, you get the instant gratification. So therefore you want to keep doing it. However, it creates some of these long-term damaging effects. There's risk involved with continuing in that, such like damaging relationships. If you're working that much, how much are you actually connecting to your loved ones? Or do you have friends? Do you have a family at home? We are creatures of connection. So in our biology, there's parts of the brain that light up when we make connections to other people, and it's in our nature. It's a basic human need. And so if a person is, in that example that you're talking about, acting in this way, what I described is an addiction, the workaholism, right? And this could be any behavior. This could be binge watching 12 hours of Netflix or the whole jar of peanut butter, or it could be anything. But it's a behavior that we engage in that provides relief. Therefore, we want to do it more despite long-term damaging effects. And so it's, what is the person trying to get relief from or escape? We have to go back to that, because the thing like workaholism or any sort of addictive behavior is an attempt to solve a problem. It's an attempt to get relief. And that's not a bad thing, but we have to figure out, why is there pain to begin with? What is it that you're escaping from? I know as a therapist, one of the connections I've made in my life is that growing up, in hindsight, I definitely had some pretty low self-esteem and didn't feel very important. And so what better way to feel important than for people to need me all the time? And I'm not saying I do that, that's why I'm doing it. I'm not saying that at all. I love what I do, and I love people, and I love helping. But there comes a point where, how much of this is fulfilling something that is a pain point for me? And what does that mean to work into late hours of the night and to be responding to emails at times where I should be resting? Things like that I'm much, much better about now, for sure. But just in that example, I think people needed to take a step back and not, I need to stop working. No, if you work a lot and you have healthy relationships and you're feeling good about yourself and your physical health is doing well, by all means. But if it's in some way an attempt to escape, or in some way an attempt to get relief or to feel good about yourself, then that's where we got to take a look. So I don't know if all that makes sense, but If I answered your question.
Does, yeah. And the logical follow-up question is, does it mean that all the high achievers of history that people romanticize and look up to, they were just profoundly messed up and they have something to to prove? Is that how the logic flows?
Not necessarily. I think that people need to take an honest look at, why am I behaving the way that I am? And is this something that is helping me? Is this something that I feel connected to with my purpose in life? And is it causing any damage to myself or those around me? Because like I said before, there could be one person who is sleeping on the floor at the work because they're there for all these hours or whatnot, but they know that's in the short term for whatever reason, and that they are going to have good, healthy boundaries to manage their sleep well and to keep up with their relationships. Or this could be the person who's just so obsessed and in it that they're not realizing how much it's causing them to disengage in their marriage, or they don't realize how much it's actually taking a physical toll on themselves. But what is the compulsion and the drive to do that? What's the payoff? And then why do you need that payoff? So it's definitely not a blanket statement, for sure.
That makes me realize another thing, that like a lot of people you speak to, at least like where I work in my domain, there's a lot of I need a holiday. And if going on a holiday is going to fix you, and there's always this talk about, I need to fix this. What you're saying also means that it's more about realizing, right, your drives and your situation, and then you can make more choices rather than just blindly following instincts and ending up in situations, right? If you at least realize what's driving you to be overworking, then you can decide if it's a good thing or a bad thing for you, and you can act accordingly. So is that like part of the approach to, rather than judging and fixing and doing things like that, just help people realize that?
Yeah, curiosity is a superpower. And the more we can be curious about our behavior or that in others, non-judgmental curiosity, then the easier it's going to be to bring what's subconscious conscious. So 95% of our brain is subconscious. So what you and I are doing right here and right now, it's 5% of our brain. So you got to think, what's the driver in our life? It's what is subconscious, right? Yeah. That takes up the most part of the brain. As people are familiar with the concept of limiting beliefs or blind spots, that's subconscious stuff. But the more we become self-aware, you can't become unaware. And then that's when change can happen. People who are just reactive to life are totally driven by their subconscious. And that creates all sorts of problems. But people who learn to respond to life and can take the pause and reflect and become more self-aware are able to then make certain choices that are in their best interest versus a self-protective sort of response.
I'm flattered for you to frame me this as conscious. What I'm saying. I'm not sure I'm always making that much sense, but yeah, I completely agree with your point. How spread out is all of this? Are there any stats that tell us how many people experience that? Because there's always like a little bit of a double-edged sword. Like on one hand, there is some comfort in knowing that other people are going through that. On the other hand, it's okay, if everybody's burnt out, then maybe we have a bigger problem. Do we have any stats on that?
1 in 4 people will struggle with some sort of mental health issue, problem, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, and any of the things. And everything really skyrocketed when the pandemic happened. Like, for instance, addiction and domestic violence, that went up by 500% just in 2020. And the rates of suicide and depression and loneliness, I don't know the exact stat off the top of my head, but it like more than tripled. And there's some bounce back with some of that, but that just proves a point that we are not meant for disconnect. And that's what the pandemic did. It helped in a lot of ways. I think companies realized that they could get innovative and creative and that we're flexible and adaptable and all of that. However, part of the reason why the mental health decline happened is because of the lack of human connection. And I like to take that a step further, is that being physically separated from people isn't the only way to not be connected. The inability to be vulnerable is a lack of connection. The inability to express how you feel about things creates a lack of connection. I know I've been in relationships before, I was married before, and I felt very alone in it because of the dynamic of that relationship. And so people's ability to use and perceive and manage and name their own emotions and be able to express that is vital to our well-being. And people who think expressing how you feel or vulnerability is a weakness, and the word vulnerable, that literally means that you have a chance of being hurt. And it's always going to be scary, and it's always going to feel like a risk. And it is the only way to move forward in life and in relationships. So when we are forced to disconnect from people, or and I see this a lot with leaders too, where what I was saying earlier about the loneliness or the feeling like I gotta have it all together, and they can't say to their team, like, I'm having a bad week, or I'm having a bad day, or here's what's going on in my life. Need help on X, Y, and Z ends. I need to rely on my team for this because this is what I have going on. That's a good leader, right? Versus the person who is going to, throw themselves on the sword of I gotta have it together, and then have their own sort of mental and emotional collapse down the road. So I believe that being online as much as we are, it's great. And I think it's advanced a lot of things for us. But we have to be careful of emotional isolation and physical isolation as well. We need to be around people because all of that is going to play a part into how well you're doing mentally and emotionally, which is ultimately also going to affect your productivity.
So what is it specifically? Obviously, coming from a tech background, I spend a lot of time on video calls with people. So in a way, I feel more connected than I would have been before with people all over the world, right? I constantly chat to somebody, and it's almost unhealthy in itself. But then during the pandemic, we were all stuck in our homes with like our immediate family, right? So part of me is wondering, okay, fine. So the people that we're supposed to be the most connected to, we technically still had access to them for the most part, obviously, other than people living alone and stuff like that. And we had all this connectivity, right? That didn't go away, that actually increased, and we spent a bunch of time online. So why did it not work at all? Why do we feel so disconnected?
I think that for some people, being around their family may be really great. For other people, family's not safe. I think about a lot of kids who go to school, and school's their safe space because home is not. You think about how much addiction and domestic violence went up in 2020 because people didn't have anything to do, and then they're just getting on each other's nerves. It's going to go down to what is the home environment like? And our environment is one of the biggest predictors of how we're doing. The other piece of that too is now people who could leave work at work because they go to work every day, then now work is everywhere. Work is at home. And one of the things I talked about with people in 2020 is to have a completely separate space that is your work environment. Don't do it at the kitchen table or on the couch where you're going to spend your own time because there's no boundary there. And boundaries protect us and they keep us safe. I still made sure that I would, at the end of the workday, take my watch off and leave it in my office or charge it over there. Taking my watch off and putting it aside was this cognitive mental boundary of I'm done with work, and then I don't want to see the papers, I don't want to see everything else, and then go into the other parts of the home. When there's no boundaries around that, you just carry that stress with you, and then people aren't their best. I think in that situation, let's add on the fact that people were really scared because there was this virus out there. So that's a whole other element to it. Fear created a lot of uncertainty and panic and all of that. So all those things combined And what did people do with that information, right? So I think another reason why people being stuck at home with their families is, were you a family where you're able to turn off the TV and talk about how you feel? Like, yeah, I'm really scared, or I'm having a hard time with this or this. Or were you a family where you don't talk about those things? You have to keep it to yourself. Parents aren't checking up on their kids about how they're doing, even though they're hearing all this scary information. And that's where that vulnerability piece is so important, the ability to be honest and to have some emotional exposure about how you're truly feeling about things. What kind of home do you grow up in, or did you grow up in? Was it a home where it was okay to express sadness, or could you only be angry and happy? These sort of unspoken rules of how you can and can't feel. So there's lots of things that are involved as to why that wasn't good for people, but all of those things contributed to it.
As you were talking about the mental boundary of putting away your watch, like I never managed to do any of that. I just was like, oh, I've got extra time to work on more things.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that everyone responds to things differently. Yeah. Right. And I think for certain individuals, based off of, are you more introverted or extroverted? I mean, loved the pandemic. Oh, man, for the most part. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm good with being by myself, because that's how you recharge, and having like little interactions here and there. So there's definitely, it depends on personality, depends on where you get your energy from. People who get a lot of energy from doing their work and have extra time to do it, it's a great thing. So it's not across the board the same, but for that time and period that you're talking about, the uncertainty and fear, and whether the environment you lived in was conducive to your mental and emotional well-being, played a big impact over how well you got through that time.
Before we pivot to more of the answers part of this conversation, and we try to generate something helpful for our listeners, one thing we haven't said was the word stress, right? Mm. And I've been wondering lately what stress actually is. Can you help me with that? And how it relates to burnout and the other things we discussed. Mm-hmm.
Stress is too many demands and not enough resources. It's something that's currently happening to you that you don't have enough resources for. Versus anxiety is something that your nervous system is responding to that hasn't even happened yet. So your nervous system is activated in both. One is a situation that's currently happening. Anxiety is something that hasn't happened yet. If you think about what creates stress, like at work, a lot of times we'll hear, oh, there's just too much pressure. Why is there too much pressure? Because all these demands are happening. Well, why can't you meet these demands? Because there's not enough time, or I don't know how to do this or that. So there's not enough resources. So too many demands, not enough resources. And that's the nervous system's response to feeling like there's a threat, which is why you get those physiological feelings of tightness in your chest, the knots in your shoulders. You hear all the time, oh, I carry stress in my shoulders and in my neck. Your body's response to all of that is that it starts to guard you, it tightens up. But it's for those reasons, that there are not enough resources, but too many demands.
Got it. And then if I am not enjoying my time at work because I know the mood is bad and I don't know, the project's not going well and I don't know if my job's going to be there, that would be anxiety, right? That would be the other thing you described. That wouldn't be going under stress, right?
Yeah, if you're worried about your job not being there, then that's something that hasn't happened yet. So you feel anxious about that. Now, there is the stress of being in maybe a work environment where it is not helpful or healthy to you. We hear the term a lot, like a toxic boss or a toxic work environment. And when that happens, your body picks up on stuff before it even makes it to your brain. We need our instincts. We need our gut intuition. We have a nervous system that's connected to our brain, a nervous system that's connected to our heart, has its own wiring, and a nervous system that's connected to our gut. Back in the day, if you had to survive out in the wild, you wouldn't go off of your logic a whole much. You would go off of your gut instinct. And in case there's a predator out there, an animal or something like that, that's why we have those gut instincts. And when we're in environments with emotionally, verbally, physically unsafe people, your gut is, get me out of there. I don't need to be here. It's sending off all of these signals. And that activation of the nervous system is a form of stress and anxiety because it's currently happening, but then there's also fear of what else could happen.
And then for burnout, I guess anxiety would be like additive factor here, right? Stress could also be additional factor here. But does burnout necessarily mean that you're experiencing either stress or anxiety, or can it be completely unrelated?
Definitely think stress and anxiety plays into it. So if you go back to burnout, is that there is a drain. Your energy is being drained. Nothing is filling your cup fast enough to replace the energy that's coming out of you. And if that's the case, then it could be for any of those reasons mentioned earlier. But to me, that sounds like a person who has too many demands on them, whether it is self-imposed or it's because of external things. And there's nothing that is going on to recharge or refuel that person. And so with that, I think so stress, it plays a part of all that. But when burnout is happening, then that in and of itself creates more anxiety for people, because then it's easy to get future focus into all the what ifs. And then that can be this sort of perpetuating cycle of worry, which is anxiety, that comes from the demands not being met that you can't meet. And then that creates more worry, and then there's more demands. And so it's just a cycle that goes on and on. And they both play a significant part of it.
So now, for anybody listening to this who might not yet or at the moment be in a position to go and give you a call and get some coaching, what's your advice? Where do they start, and why should they use Sofree?
Yeah. So, a few things. One, I always encourage people just to find one, whether it's a friend or someone that's at least in the know about how you're doing. Loneliness and isolation is going to make everything worse. So you don't have to go to a coach or therapist if you can't, but talk to somebody. We heal through relationships. And when we have someone that we can talk to, that in and of itself is very healing. So that would be the first step. The second would be to evaluate, where am I not saying no? Or where am I not saying yes? Am I not saying no to staying late? Therefore, I'm not saying yes to more downtime and play or creativity. But our inability to say no is going to create a lot of continued stress and burnout for people. And when all that happens, we have this overactive nervous system. And those creates the feelings that we don't like, because our fight, flight, freeze system, that is meant for when there's an actual threat. But what used to be the saber-toothed tiger is now our boss. And so we have this overactive nervous system that's going off when we don't need it to. And so having emotional regulation is difficult because of just how we've adapted in this world. So things that can help calm your body physically down, breathing techniques are great. Meditation is great. But the app that I'm doing with my brother, it detects your stress for you through a wearable. I have my watch on. It'll alert me, let me know that I'm stressed. And I love how smart everything is. So it knows the difference between stress, anxiety, and then are you exercising? But it'll alert you when you're stressed. And then you are able to pick from 3 different modes. Sofree hear, Sofree feel, and Sofree see. And Sofree hear, you would just put your AirPods in, earbuds, and what it'll do is it'll give you alternating sounds from the left to right side of your ears. So that makes the left and right side of the brain come online alternately, which pulls you out of a stress response. If you go to the doctor's office and if your arms or legs are crossed over your midline when they go to take your blood pressure, they make you uncross it because it shows a drop in your heart rate. So when anything bilateral happens, it makes your nervous system come online. Have you heard the phrase walk it off? It's bilateral. It helps you calm down. Parents who intuitively sway their babies back and forth, it makes the parasympathetic nervous system come online, which is the nervous system that helps you relax. So it'll alert you. You can put your earbuds in if you want, super discreet, or if you don't have that or don't like that, then it'll do a vibration. So a vibration from the left side of your body, like wherever side of the body your watch is on, to the opposite side of the body where you'll put your phone. So a vibration will go left to right. Or if you don't have either of those, then we do the original form of bilateral stimulation, which is eye tracking. And the phone or the app will tell you where to hold the phone, and it will track your eyes from left to right. And in under 2 minutes, we can have your nervous system reset. So really helps in the moment regulate so that you can get back to clear thinking again. Because when we're in a stress response, we lose access to this front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and rational thinking. So we're not at our best when we're stressed. And Sofree frees you up from the stressors of life by regulating your nervous system for you. So if people want to sign up for it, they can, because we're about to launch our beta in early January, and we need testers because we want to make this great for the world.
I have to tell people how to sign up.
So you go to www.getsofree.com.
Why isn't everybody using that? It's like virtually free, right? It's got so many benefits. There's a bunch of solid science that says this works. Why isn't that prescribed by everybody all the time?
That's a great question. So I know about bilateral stimulation from being an EMDR therapist. Otherwise, I would not know what it is. And when I brought this idea to my brother, he hadn't heard about what it was. A lot of people were like, what is this thing? So it's just not common knowledge. And we're excited about this app because there's lots of relaxation apps out there. And I think all of those are great. Don't stop doing those things by any means. But there isn't anything that's providing actual reset of your nervous system in the moment when you need it. And the great thing about it is that there is a lot of science to back it. So we know it's going to work. And that's why we're ready to get it out to the public.
That's fantastic. And going back to the saber tooth you mentioned, are you also a proponent of cold plunges and the things that's supposed to temporarily spike your chemicals so that your organism gets a chance to self-regulate as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's so much research on the benefits of cold plunges, cold showers, burning off that, making your adrenaline go so your body burns it off, and then you feel more calm afterwards and more regulated and less inflammation in the body. And all that stuff is super great.
Okay. So then I guess the last piece of puzzle that's missing is that a lot of people will have access to Headspace or Calm or one of those apps, and typically the usage rates are extremely low. It's literally free, your employer paid for that, and people are still not using that. What advice can you give so that it actually sticks? A lot of people just go, use it, oh, it's nice, it did something, and then they never go and do it again. How do you make your patients actually stick to this in long term?
For the app and for when I use bilateral stimulation with my clients, the buy-in is immediate because they feel the immediate relief. And a big part of why I came up with this app is because I'm one of those people too. I have to work just as hard at all this stuff as everybody else. Yeah. So let's just make that clear. And taking time out, as just being honest here, it still takes time. It still takes effort to do meditation, to do breathing, to all that. And those are great habits. And I think that a lot of times people will quit it because they're doing too much too fast versus breaking things into really small, manageable pieces. Don't try to meditate for an hour when you never meditated before. Start with 30 seconds. And so they're not getting the payoff, the benefit that they want because it's just not practical. So I think one, people have to manage their own expectations around some of these apps maybe doing it in shorter bursts so that you build up the habit, you have good experiences with it. But with the app with Sofree, people are going to feel the effects immediately. I have a client in my office, and if they're starting to get flooded or have an anxiety or panic attack, I'll have them start tapping like this, where there's these things that they hold that pulse back and forth. And within seconds, the heart rate comes down. Our CMO just shared an awesome story about how he was on a plane and started getting anxious. And so all of us on the team, we have the app right now because we're testing it. It's in the alpha stage. And he had tried some different things. And then he thought, yeah, let me use the app. And could literally watch his heart rate come down in real time because of what this does to the brain. So people having the payoff immediately that they're needing, the feeling that relief and not having to put a ton of effort into it. And like that's going to keep people from disregarding it over time, because you want this little companion in your back pocket when you need it. Sofree's kind of like your buddy there, always with you, there to help. And it doesn't take any extra time or effort. Not saying that it solves life problems, but it does help regulate your nervous system.
Finally, an app that does it the Western way, the expectation of immediate relief.
Yeah.
And it's not even a pill. But I do feel like the evolution played the trick on us here, right? It's how is it this hard to get yourself back together, given how difficult life used to be to even survive in the first place?
Yep. To that point, we still had villages where everyone helped everybody, and not one person was all things to you. You had multiple people in community around you to all help out, and now we're all just gridlocked in our own little world and bubble. And then, stress is different than it used to be, and the demands are different, and the pace of life and all of that. And the more we can have a regulated nervous system while having meaningful connections to people is one of the best paths forward.
At least we've got multiple platforms with short form video that just injects dopamine. Oh wait, no, that's not good. All right. It's been a real pleasure. I'm really glad we had this conversation. Hopefully it creates a real change in at least a few people who end up taking it seriously. I already have questions, so I think I'm going to have to get you another time when the app is all tested, and we'll see how it's changing people's lives. And for today, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.